Sometimes the most powerful moments happen when we think nobody is watching. What happens when a Hollywood superstar, known for playing tough characters on screen, discovers that real heroism isn't about fast cars or explosive action scenes? This is the true story of how one unexpected evening at a small family restaurant changed everything for a struggling server, her family, and reminded everyone present that genuine humanity often comes from the most surprising places. In a world where celebrity encounters usually involve red carpets and flashing cameras, this story unfolds in the quiet corners of an ordinary restaurant where real life happens. Where tips mean the difference between paying rent and sleeping in a car. Where a single mother's tears in a storage closet could either go unnoticed forever or spark a chain of events that would restore faith in human kindness. This isn't just another celebrity story. This is about what happens when someone with the power to change lives chooses to use it, not for headlines or publicity, but simply because it's the right thing to do. The rain hammered against the windows of Mario's family bistro with the kind of intensity that makes people want to stay inside. It was one of those Tuesday evenings in downtown Los Angeles where the weather seemed to wash the streets clean of everything except the most determined souls. Inside the warm, dimly lit restaurant, the familiar sounds of clinking glasses and quiet conversations created a cocoon of comfort against the storm outside. Vin Diesel pulled his black baseball cap lower over his eyes as he stepped through the heavy wooden door, shaking droplets from his leather jacket. He had specifically chosen this place because it was the kind of neighborhood restaurant where people came to eat, not to spot celebrities. After 3 months of grueling film shoots, premieres, and endless interviews, he craved nothing more than a quiet meal, without cameras flashing or fans asking for selfies. The restaurant was exactly what he had hoped for. Small, round tables covered with checkered tablecloths filled the space, while old family photos and vintage Italian movie posters decorated the walls. The lighting was soft and golden, creating intimate shadows that would help him blend into the background. A handful of couples sat scattered throughout the dining room, lost in their own conversations, completely unaware that one of Hollywood's biggest action stars had just walked into their quiet sanctuary. Maria Santos wiped down table 6 for the third time in 10 minutes, her movements automatic and tired. Her black hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and despite her best efforts to look professional, the exhaustion showed in the slight slump of her shoulders and the way she kept glancing at the clock on the far wall. She had been working double shifts for the past 2 weeks, covering for a co-worker who had quit without notice, and every muscle in her body ached with the kind of fatigue that sleep couldn't cure. At 28, Maria had been working in restaurants since she was 16, but this job at Mario's felt different. The owner, Giuseppe, treated his staff like family, and the regular customers had become familiar faces who asked about her day and actually listened to the answer. It was the kind of place where she could save money for her dreams while building something that felt like a community. But tonight, those dreams felt further away than ever. Earlier that day, she had received a call that changed everything. Her younger brother Carlos, who had been struggling with addiction for the past year, had been arrested again. The bail money would wipe out every penny she had saved for nursing school. 3 years of working extra shifts, skipping meals, and saying no to every small luxury had all been for nothing. She watched as the tall man in the baseball cap settled into a corner booth, grateful for the distraction from her thoughts. He kept his head down as he studied the menu, and something about his posture suggested he was hoping to remain invisible. Maria had served enough customers to recognize when someone wanted to be left alone, so she approached his table with professional courtesy, rather than her usual warm smile. Vin looked up as she approached, and for a moment their eyes met. He saw immediately that something was wrong. Her smile was practiced and polite, but it didn't reach her eyes, which held a sadness that seemed too deep for someone so young. Years of reading people for his roles had taught him to notice the details others missed, and everything about this young woman suggested she was carrying a burden too heavy for her shoulders. "Good evening," Maria said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "Can I start you with something to drink?" "Just water for now," Vin replied, keeping his voice neutral. "And maybe a few more minutes with the menu." Maria nodded and turned away, but not before Vin caught a glimpse of her hands shaking slightly as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. He had seen that kind of barely contained emotion before, usually in his co-stars during particularly difficult scenes. Separating him by their young woman's life, it was serious. As Maria walked toward the kitchen to get his water, she felt the familiar burn of tears threatening to spill over. She had managed to hold herself together through most of her shift, but something about the kindness in the stranger's voice had cracked her carefully maintained composure. She ducked into the small storage closet next to the kitchen, hoping for just a moment to collect herself before returning to work. The closet smelled of cleaning supplies and dried herbs, and Maria leaned against the metal shelving as the tears finally came. She pressed her hand over her mouth to muffle the sobs, not wanting anyone to hear her breakdown. 3 years of sacrifice. And for what? Carlos would probably be arrested again within a month, and she would be right back where she started, working minimum wage jobs with no end in sight. She thought about the nursing school acceptance letter tucked away in her dresser drawer at home. The letter that had filled her with such hope 6 months ago, when her future had seemed bright and achievable. Now it felt like a cruel joke. A reminder of how naive she had been to think she could escape the cycle of poverty that had trapped her family for generations. From his booth, Vin could see the kitchen area through the service window, and he noticed when the young server disappeared from view. Something about her demeanor had reminded him of his own sister when they were growing up in New York, struggling to make ends meet after their father left. He remembered the weight of responsibility that had settled on Sophia's shoulders when she was barely 20, trying to help support their family while pursuing her own dreams. The restaurant continued its quiet rhythm around him. An elderly couple near the window shared a piece of tiramisu, feeding each other small bites with the tenderness of people who had been together for decades. A young man at the bar nursed a glass of wine while reading a paperback novel, completely absorbed in whatever story was unfolding on the pages. The normalcy of it all should have been comforting, but Vin found himself distracted by thoughts of the server who had disappeared. Giuseppe emerged from the kitchen, a stout man in his 60s with flour dusting his apron and genuine warmth radiating from his weathered face. He had owned Mario's for 15 years, and he knew every customer by name and every employee's story. Tonight, he was covering the bar because his usual bartender had called in sick, but his eyes kept drifting toward the storage closet where he had seen Maria retreat 5 minutes ago. As the owner of a family restaurant, Giuseppe had learned to read the signs when his staff was struggling. Maria had been one of his best employees for over a year, always punctual, always professional, and always kind to customers even on the worst days. But lately, he had noticed the strain in her smile and the way she stayed busy to avoid conversation. Whatever was happening in her personal life, it was affecting her in ways she was trying hard to hide. The sound of muffled crying finally reached Vin's ears, so faint that he might have missed it if he hadn't been listening for signs of distress. It was coming from somewhere behind the kitchen, and his instinct was to investigate. Years of playing heroes on screen had ingrained in him a natural response to help when someone was in trouble, even if the cameras weren't rolling. He stood quietly from his booth and walked toward the sound, his footsteps silent on the worn carpet. As he got closer to the storage closet, the crying became clearer, and he could hear the kind of broken sobs that come from someone who has been holding back tears for too long. It was the sound of someone whose world had just fallen apart, and despite being a stranger in this place, Vin felt compelled to do something. Maria pressed her face against her hands, trying to muffle the sounds of her breakdown while fighting to regain control. She knew she needed to get back to work, that Giuseppe would worry if she stayed hidden much longer, but the weight of her situation felt crushing. Every dream she had worked toward was slipping away, and she felt powerless to stop it. She thought about her mother, who had cleaned houses for 20 years to support her children after their father abandoned the family. She thought about Carlos, who had been such a bright kid before the drugs took hold of his life. She thought about all the sacrifices that had led her to this moment, standing in a storage closet crying over a future that suddenly seemed impossible to achieve. The gentle knock on the closet door made her freeze, her breath catching in her throat. She wiped her eyes quickly and tried to compose herself, hoping whoever it was would assume she was just getting supplies and move on. "Excuse me," came a deep, gentle voice from the other side of the door. "Are you okay in there?" Maria's heart sank. She recognized the voice of the customer from table 12, and the last thing she wanted was to lose her job because a guest had caught her crying at work. She cleared her throat and tried to make her voice sound normal. "I'm fine, thank you. Just getting some supplies, I'll be right out." But Vin could hear the tears in her voice, the way it shook despite her efforts to sound professional. He had a choice to make. He could walk away and pretend he hadn't heard anything, return to his table and enjoy his quiet meal as planned. Or he could do something that might make a difference, even if it meant revealing his identity and giving up his anonymity for the evening. "Listen," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what's going on, but I can tell you're hurting. You don't have to talk to me, but you don't have to face whatever this is alone." The kindness in his voice broke through Maria's defenses completely. She had been carrying this burden by herself for so long, and the unexpected compassion from a stranger felt like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning in deep water. Against her better judgment, she found herself reaching for the door handle. When the closet door opened, Vin found himself face to face with a young woman whose eyes were red with tears, but whose chin was lifted with the kind of dignity that comes from surviving difficult circumstances. Even in her moment of vulnerability, there was a strength about her that reminded him of every strong woman who had shaped his life. "I'm sorry," Maria said, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "This is so unprofessional. I just needed a minute." "Don't apologize," Vin said gently. "We all have moments when life hits us harder than we expect. Sometimes we just need someone to witness that it's okay to not be okay." Maria looked at him more carefully for the first time, taking in the familiar shape of his face beneath the baseball cap. Recognition flickered in her eyes, but rather than excitement or starstruck wonder, she seemed almost embarrassed to be seen in such a vulnerable state by someone famous. "You're?" she began, then stopped herself. "I'm sorry. I don't want to bother you. You came here to eat in peace, and here I am crying in storage closets." "My name is Mark," Vin said, using the name he often gave when he wanted to remain anonymous. "And right now, I'm just someone who happened to hear another person in pain and wanted to help if I could. The job title doesn't matter when someone needs a friend." The simple honesty in his words, and his attempt to make her feel comfortable despite his celebrity status, touched something deep in Maria's heart. Here was someone who could have walked away, who had every reason to avoid getting involved in a stranger's problems, but instead had chosen to show up with nothing but kindness. As they stood in the narrow hallway between the kitchen and dining room, with the sounds of the restaurant continuing around them, both of them understood that this was one of those unexpected moments when two lives intersect in ways that could change everything. Neither of them knew yet how this conversation would unfold, but both could sense that something significant was beginning. Maria found herself studying the face of the man who had introduced himself as Mark, trying to process the surreal nature of the moment. Here was Vin Diesel, one of the world's most recognizable action stars, standing in the cramped hallway of Mario's family bistro, asking about her problems with genuine concern in his eyes. The contrast between his larger-than-life screen presence and this quiet, compassionate person before her was almost overwhelming. "I should get back to work," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. The truth was, she didn't want this moment of human connection to end, even though every professional instinct told her to return to her tables. "When does your shift end?" Vin asked gently. "Maybe we could talk then if you want to. Sometimes it helps to share what's weighing on your heart with someone who's not connected to the situation." Maria glanced toward the dining room, where she could see Giuseppe wiping down the bar and occasionally looking in their direction with concern. The restaurant was quieter now, with only a few tables still occupied, and she knew her shift would end in less than an hour. "I get off at 10, she said hesitantly. "But I don't want to keep you from your evening. I'm sure you have better things to do than listen to a stranger's problems." "Actually, Vin," said with a small smile, "talking with real people about real things is exactly what I need tonight. I've spent the last 3 months surrounded by scripts and schedules and people who want something from me. A genuine conversation would be a gift." Something in his tone convinced Maria that he meant what he said. She nodded slowly and wiped the last traces of tears from her cheeks. "Okay," she said. "Let me finish my shift and then maybe we can talk." As Maria returned to the dining room to check on her remaining tables, Vin went back to his booth with a different perspective on his evening. What had started as an escape from his complicated celebrity life had become something much more meaningful. He ordered the homemade lasagna and a glass of Chianti, but found himself more interested in observing Maria as she moved through her duties. He watched as she refilled water glasses, cleared plates, and chatted briefly with the elderly couple by the window. Despite whatever personal crisis she was facing, she maintained a professional demeanor and treated every customer with kindness. There was a grace in her movements and a resilience in her smile that spoke of someone who had learned to carry heavy burdens without letting them break her. Giuseppe approached Vin's table as he was finishing his meal, carrying a small plate with a slice of homemade tiramisu. "On the house," the older man said, setting the plate down. "You're new here, but I can tell you're good people. Anyone who stops to help one of my girls when she's hurting is family in my book." Vin looked up, surprised that Giuseppe had observed their interaction. "Your server seems like a special person. I hope whatever she's going through works out." Giuseppe's expression grew serious as he glanced toward Maria, who was counting her tips at the register. "Maria is one of the best people I know, works harder than anyone should have to, saving money for nursing school while taking care of her family. But life keeps throwing her curveballs, and I worry she's going to give up on her dreams." "Nursing school?" Vin asked, intrigued. "Been her dream since she was a kid. Her mother worked multiple jobs to support the family after their father left, and Maria saw how the nurses at the free clinic treated her with dignity when everyone else looked down on them. She's been saving every penny for 3 years to pay for school. Giuseppe leaned closer, lowering his voice. Today she got some bad news about her brother. Kid's been struggling with addiction, and now he's in trouble again. I think she's going to use her school money to help him, even though we both know he'll probably waste it. The picture Giuseppe painted matched what Vin had sensed about Maria's situation. Here was someone facing an impossible choice between her own future and her family's immediate needs. It was the kind of real-world dilemma that no movie script could fully capture. As 10 o'clock approached, the last customers finished their meals and filtered out into the night. The storm had passed, leaving the streets glistening under the streetlights. Maria finished her closing duties while Vin waited patiently at his table, occasionally chatting with Giuseppe about the restaurant's history in the neighborhood. When Maria finally approached his table, she had changed out of her work apron and let her hair down. She looked younger somehow, but also more vulnerable, without the armor of her professional persona. There's a 24-hour diner down the street that makes decent coffee, she said. If you still want to talk, that is. Vin left money on the table for his meal and a generous tip, then followed Maria out into the cool night air. The diner she had mentioned was a classic 1950s-style establishment with red vinyl booths and a long counter where a few late-night regulars nursed cups of coffee and picked at slices of pie. They slid into a booth near the back, and Maria ordered coffee while Vin asked for hot chocolate, admitting with a sheepish grin that he had never developed a taste for caffeine. The simple admission made Maria smile for the first time all evening. So, Vin said once their drinks arrived, Giuseppe mentioned you're saving for nursing school. That's an incredible goal. Maria's smile faded slightly. Was saving, she corrected. I got accepted to the program 6 months ago, but I deferred enrollment to save more money. Today I found out that all those savings are going to have to go somewhere else. She told him about Carlos, about the years of watching her younger brother spiral deeper into addiction despite their family's efforts to help him. She described the phone call that morning, informing her that he had been arrested for possession with intent to distribute, and that the bail money would equal exactly what she had saved for school. The worst part is, I know he'll probably get arrested again, Maria said, staring into her coffee cup. I know that using this money won't actually solve his problems, but he's my little brother, and I can't let him sit in jail while I have the means to help him. Vin listened without interrupting, recognizing the weight of the impossible choice she faced. He thought about his own family, about the times when love had compelled him to make sacrificial decisions that didn't always make logical sense. What does your heart tell you to do? He asked finally. My heart tells me to help him, even though my head knows it's probably useless, Maria admitted. 3 years of working double shifts, of saying no to movies and dinners out and new clothes. 3 years of dreaming about becoming a nurse and helping people the way those clinic nurses help my family. All of it gone because I can't watch my brother suffer, even when he's caused his own suffering. And if you don't use the money for bail? He sits in county jail for 6 months while waiting for trial. Maybe that's exactly what he needs. But I can't live with myself knowing I could have prevented it. She looked up at Vin with eyes that held equal measures of determination and defeat. I guess that makes me an enabler, but sometimes love makes us do things that aren't smart. Vin was quiet for a long moment, turning his mug of hot chocolate between his hands while he processed what Maria had shared. Her situation reminded him of conversations he had had with fans over the years. People who had poured their hearts out about family struggles and impossible choices. But this wasn't a fan meeting or a scripted interaction. This was a real person facing a real crisis, and he found himself more invested in the outcome than he had expected. Can I ask you something? He said finally. If money wasn't an issue, if you could help your brother and still go to nursing school, what would you do? I'd probably try to get him into a real treatment program instead of just bailing him out, Maria said without hesitation. Jail doesn't treat addiction, it just punishes it. But good treatment programs cost more than bail money, and our insurance doesn't cover much. And nursing school, is it something you'd still want to pursue? Maria's entire demeanor changed when she talked about nursing. Her voice became stronger, more confident, and for the first time since he had met her, Vin saw the young woman she might be if she weren't carrying the weight of her family's problems.
I've wanted to be a nurse since I was 12, she said.
My mum got really sick one winter, and we ended up at the county hospital emergency room. We waited for hours, and most of the staff treated us like we were wasting their time because we didn't have good insurance. But there was this one nurse, Elena, who talked to my mum like she mattered. She explained everything that was happening, brought us blankets, and made sure we understood the discharge instructions. Maria's eyes grew distant as she remembered. Elena told me that nursing wasn't just about medical care. It was about seeing people's dignity when they couldn't see it themselves. She said the best nurses were the ones who remembered what it felt like to need help. That's exactly the kind of nurse the world needs more of, Vin said quietly. Maybe, Maria said, her momentary enthusiasm fading back into resignation. But wanting something and being able to achieve it are different things. Life keeps happening and some of us just don't get to follow our dreams. What if I told you that wasn't true? Vin asked. What if I told you that sometimes the universe puts people in each other's paths, specifically so that dreams can survive the obstacles that threaten to destroy them? Maria looked at him skeptically. That's a nice thought, but in the real world, money doesn't appear just because you need it. Dreams are luxuries for people who can afford them. Actually, Vin said, leaning forward with a seriousness that made Maria pay attention, I think dreams are necessities for people who understand their value. And sometimes those dreams need protecting from the people who love them most. Something in his tone made Maria's heart beat faster. There was a certainty in his voice that suggested this conversation was about to take a turn she hadn't expected. What are you saying? She asked quietly. I'm saying that you shouldn't have to choose between helping your brother and pursuing your education. I'm saying that both problems have solutions, and sometimes those solutions require accepting help from unexpected places. Maria shook her head quickly. Oh no, I can't let you do that. I wasn't telling you my story because I wanted charity, I just needed someone to listen. I know you weren't asking for anything, Vin said gently. But sometimes people share their stories at exactly the moment when someone else is in a position to help. Maybe that's not a coincidence. You don't even know me, Maria protested. I could be lying about everything. I could be taking advantage of your kindness.
Could be,
Vin agreed with a slight smile.
but I've gotten pretty good at reading people over the years, and everything about you tells me you're exactly who you appear to be.
Someone who works hard, loves deeply, and deserves the chance to follow her dreams. Maria felt tears threatening again, but this time they weren't tears of despair. They were the overwhelming emotion of someone who had been drowning and suddenly discovered that rescue was possible. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say you'll let me help, Vin said simply. Say you'll let me pay for your brother's treatment program and your nursing school tuition. Say you'll give yourself permission to accept a gift that could change your life. The magnitude of what he was offering hit Maria like a wave. Not just bail money, but real treatment for Carlos, and the chance for her to pursue her dreams without having to sacrifice one for the other. It was more generosity than she had ever imagined possible from anyone, let alone a stranger she had met just a few hours ago. Why? She asked, her voice barely audible. Why would you do that for someone you don't know? Vin thought about his answer carefully, knowing that his words would matter deeply to this young woman who was struggling to understand his motivation. Because when I was growing up, my family struggled too, he said finally. Because I've been incredibly blessed in my career, and I believe that blessings are meant to be shared. And because you remind me that there are still people in this world who would sacrifice their own dreams to help someone they love, even when that someone doesn't deserve it. He paused, then added with complete sincerity, but mostly because I can see that you're going to be an extraordinary nurse, and the world needs more people like you taking care of others. Maria sat in stunned silence, staring at Vin across the diner table as the weight of his offer settled over her like a warm blanket on a cold night. Around them, the late-night diner hummed with quiet activity. A trucker at the counter scrolled through his phone while eating apple pie, and a couple in the next booth whispered intimately over shared fries. The normalcy of the scene made the extraordinary nature of their conversation feel even more surreal. I need you to understand something, Maria said finally, her voice shaking slightly. I've never asked anyone for help like this. Ever. My mum raised us to believe that we work for what we get and we don't take handouts. Vin nodded, recognizing the pride in her words. It was the same fierce independence he had grown up with in his own family, the same determination to make it on their own terms that had driven him through years of struggling actor jobs before his breakthrough. I respect that, he said. And this isn't a handout. Think of it as an investment in someone who's going to spend her career helping others. The money I spend on one movie scene could change your entire life trajectory. That's not charity, that's just good math. But what if I fail? Maria asked, voicing the fear that had haunted her dreams for months. What if I can't handle the coursework? Or what if I can't pass the licensing exam? What if you invest in me and I let you down? Then you'll have tried, Vin said simply. And trying and failing is still better than never having the chance to try at all. Besides, from what I've seen tonight, failure isn't really in your vocabulary. You've been working double shifts for 3 years while maintaining the grades to get into nursing school. That tells me everything I need to know about your determination. Maria thought about Elena, the nurse who had inspired her all those years ago. She wondered what Elena would say about this moment, about the choice between accepting help and maintaining pride. Probably something about how the best nurses were the ones who knew when to accept support so they could better support others. And Carlos? She asked. You really think treatment would help him more than just posting bail? I think your brother needs more than money, Vin said carefully. Addiction is a disease, and diseases need treatment, not just temporary fixes. There's a place in Malibu called Serenity Springs. It's a 6-month program that focuses on underlying trauma and family healing. Real recovery, not just detox. How do you know about that? Maria asked, surprised by his specific knowledge. Vin was quiet for a moment, then decided that honesty was the only way forward. Because my cousin went through their program 2 years ago, he had been in and out of jail for years, and we kept thinking that if we could just get him clean for a few weeks, he'd be okay. But addiction doesn't work that way. It took me learning about the science of recovery to understand that we had been trying to solve a medical problem with willpower. Is your cousin okay now? He's been sober for 18 months, he has a job he loves, and he's rebuilding relationships with his family. The program saved his life, but more than that, it saved him as a person. He's not just clean, he's happy. Maria felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the knot of despair that had been tightening all day. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a different outcome for Carlos, one where he didn't just avoid jail, but actually got better. How much would something like that cost? She asked, though she was almost afraid to hear the answer. More than bail money, Vin admitted, but not more than I can afford. And Maria, if it helps your brother become the person he was before the drugs took over, isn't that worth more than any amount of money? The waitress refilled their drinks and left them alone again. Maria wrapped her hands around her warm coffee mug and tried to process the magnitude of what was being offered. Not just financial assistance, but the chance for both her and Carlos to have futures that seemed impossible just hours ago. I need to ask you something, she said, looking directly into Vin's eyes. Why are you really doing this? And please don't tell me it's just because you can afford it. There are millions of people you could help. Why me? Vin considered her question seriously, knowing that she deserved complete honesty. Do you want the practical answer or the real answer? The real answer. The real answer is that when I saw you crying in that storage closet, it reminded me of my sister Sophia when we were kids. She was 21 and working 3 jobs to help support our family after our dad left. One night I found her crying in our kitchen because she had been accepted to art school but couldn't afford to go. She sacrificed her dreams so the rest of us could have ours. Vin's voice became quieter, more personal. Sophia never did become an artist. She ended up working in an office for 30 years. And even though she says she's happy, I can see the sadness in her eyes sometimes when she looks at paintings in galleries. She gave up her gift so others could pursue theirs, and I've always regretted that I wasn't in a position to help her back then. So this is about your sister? This is about not letting another Sophia slip through the cracks, Vin said. This is about using the platform I've been given to create the happy ending that someone deserves. Your story doesn't have to end the same way hers did. Maria felt tears welling up again, but this time they were tears of recognition rather than despair. She understood now that this wasn't about charity or pity. It was about one person who had been blessed with abundance, sharing that blessing with someone who reminded him of love and sacrifice. What would you need from me? She asked quietly. If I said yes, what would the process look like? For Carlos, I would arrange for him to be transferred directly from jail to Serenity Springs, Then explained. The program includes family therapy sessions, so you'd be part of his recovery process. For nursing school, I would pay your tuition directly to the institution and set up a fund for your living expenses so you can focus on studying instead of working multiple jobs. And in return? In return, you become the nurse you were meant to be. You help people the way Elena helped your family. You prove that sometimes investing in human potential is the best investment anyone can make. Maria was quiet for several minutes, turning the possibilities over in her mind. She thought about her mother, who had worked her fingers to the bone to give her children opportunities. She thought about Carlos, lost and struggling with demons he couldn't fight alone. She thought about all the patients she might help as a nurse and all the families who might benefit from her care. If I say yes, she said slowly, I need you to know that I won't waste this gift. I'll work harder than anyone in my class. I'll graduate with honors. I'll become the kind of nurse who makes a difference. I already know that, Vin said with a smile. That's why I'm offering. And Carlos has to actually participate in the program. If he tries to leave early or doesn't take it seriously, he needs to face the consequences. I won't enable his addiction anymore. Agreed. The program has strict policies about commitment and participation. If he's not ready to do the work, they won't keep him. Maria took a deep breath and felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Real, genuine hope for a future that looked nothing like the resignation she had been carrying all day. Okay, she said, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. I accept your help, and I promise you won't regret it. Vin reached across the table and shook her hand, but the gesture felt more like a partnership than charity. I already know I won't regret it. The question is, are you ready to stop playing small and start embracing the life you're meant to have? I think I am, Maria said, and for the first time in years, she truly meant it. They spent the next hour working out practical details. Vin took down information about Carlos's situation and Maria's nursing program. He explained that he had a team of assistants who could handle the logistics while maintaining privacy for everyone involved. Maria would never have to worry about media attention or publicity, and Carlos would be able to focus on recovery without external pressure. One more thing, Vin said as they prepared to leave the diner. I want you to keep in touch, not because I need to monitor how the money is spent, but because I want to hear about your journey. When you graduate, when you get your first job, when you help your first patient, your success will be my success. You really want to know about all that? Maria, do you know how rare it is for someone in my position to meet a real person with real dreams that aren't connected to Hollywood or fame or money? Tonight has been more meaningful to me than most of my red carpet events. Your friendship would be a gift to me. As they walked out into the cool night air, Maria felt like she was stepping into a completely different world than the one she had inhabited that morning. The same streets looked different, the same sky seemed brighter, and the future that had appeared close to her just hours ago was now wide open with possibility. Thank you, she said as they reached the point where they would part ways to their respective cars. Not just for the money, but for seeing something in me that I had stopped seeing in myself. Thank you for letting me help, Vin replied. For trusting a stranger with your story and your dreams. That took courage. Will I see you again? Maria asked. I mean, do you come to Mario's often? I have a feeling I'll be back, Vin said with a grin. Giuseppe makes excellent lasagna, and the company there is even better. As Maria drove home that night, she called her mother to share the incredible news. She called the number for Serenity Springs to ask about their intake process for Carlos. She pulled out her nursing school acceptance letter and read it again, this time with the certainty that she would actually be able to accept the opportunity. But most importantly, she called Carlos at the county jail and told him that help was coming, that real recovery was possible, and that someone believed in both of their futures enough to invest in them. His voice broke when he realized that someone was willing to give him a chance at genuine healing rather than just temporary freedom. Who is this person? Carlos asked through tears. Why would someone do this for us? Someone who understands that sometimes the best way to honor your own blessings is to share them, Maria said, repeating Vin's words. Someone who believes that we all deserve second chances and that dreams matter. That night, as Maria fell asleep in her small apartment, she thought about the nurse Elena who had inspired her path all those years ago. She wondered if Elena had ever imagined that her kindness to a scared little girl and her sick mother would ripple out into the world in such unexpected ways. Tomorrow, Maria would begin the process of becoming the kind of nurse who could create the same kind of ripples for other families in crisis. The circle of compassion was complete, but in truth, it was just beginning. 3 weeks later, Maria stood in the parking lot of Serenity Springs Recovery Center, watching as Carlos walked through the front doors for the first time. The facility was nestled in the rolling hills of Malibu, surrounded by oak trees and designed to look more like a retreat center than a treatment facility. The morning sun cast everything in golden light, and Maria could see why this place had such a good reputation for healing. Carlos looked different already. 3 weeks of sobriety had cleared some of the fog from his eyes, and although he was nervous about the 6-month commitment, there was a determination in his posture that Maria hadn't seen in years. He turned back to wave at her before disappearing through the doors, and she felt a mixture of hope and terror at watching him take this crucial step. The intake coordinator, a warm woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, had explained the family therapy component during their initial meeting. Maria would participate in weekly sessions designed to help family members understand addiction, establish healthy boundaries, and rebuild relationships damaged by years of crisis. It would be challenging work, but Dr. Chen assured her that families who committed to the process saw dramatically better outcomes for their loved ones in recovery. The hardest part for families is learning that love and enabling are not the same thing. Dr. Chen had said, "Your brother's recovery journey will teach you both how to love each other in healthier ways." As Maria drove back toward the city, she thought about how much had changed in just 3 weeks. Vin had been true to his word about handling the logistics discreetly and efficiently. Carlos had been transferred directly from county jail to a medical detox facility, then to Serenity Springs, without ever having to post bail. The nursing school had been contacted, her tuition paid in full, and a living stipend arranged so she could quit her job at Mario's and focus entirely on her studies. The transition hadn't been without its emotional challenges. Saying goodbye to Giuseppe and the familiar routine of restaurant work had been harder than expected. Mario's had been her safe haven for over a year, and the customers had become like family. Giuseppe had insisted on throwing her a small goodbye party complete with homemade tiramisu and heartfelt speeches about following dreams. "You remember us when you're a fancy nurse," Giuseppe had said with tears in his eyes, "and you remember that you always have family here if you need us." But the most surprising development had been her ongoing friendship with Vin. He had meant what he said about wanting to hear about her journey, and they had exchanged several text messages over the past weeks. Nothing inappropriate or intrusive, just check-ins about how Carlos was adjusting and how she was preparing for school. His messages were encouraging and genuine, and Maria found herself looking forward to updating him on their progress. Now, as she pulled into the parking lot of West Coast Community College, where she would begin her nursing prerequisites in just 2 days, Maria felt a familiar flutter of nerves mixed with excitement. She had been accepted directly into the RN program, but first she needed to complete several science courses that she hadn't been able to afford during her initial college years. The campus was beautiful, with modern buildings surrounded by carefully landscaped gardens and walkways bustling with students. Maria had visited once before for orientation, but today felt different. Today she was here as a full-time student, with her future paid for and her family situation stable. Today she could focus entirely on becoming the nurse she had dreamed of being. Dr. Patricia Williams, her academic advisor, greeted her warmly in the nursing department office. Dr. Williams was a seasoned nurse educator who'd been working with adult learners for over 20 years. And she had a special gift for recognizing students who brought life experience and determination to their studies. "Maria, I'm so excited to have you in our program," Dr. Williams said as they reviewed her course schedule. "Your application essay was one of the most compelling I've read in years. Tell me, what made you choose nursing?" Maria shared the story of Elena, the emergency room nurse who had treated her family with dignity during a vulnerable moment. She talked about her desire to be an advocate for patients who might not have strong voices of their own, and her interest in eventually specializing in trauma nursing or working in underserved communities. "Those are exactly the motivations that create exceptional nurses," Dr. Williams said. "The technical skills can be taught, but the heart for service and the commitment to human dignity, those qualities you already possess." They discussed the intensive nature of the program, the clinical rotations that would begin in her second semester, and the support services available to help students succeed. Maria learned about study groups, tutoring services, and mentorship programs designed to help students navigate the challenging curriculum. "I want you to know that this program has an excellent track record," Dr. Williams said. "Our graduates consistently pass the NCLELX licensing exam on their first attempt, and they're highly sought after by employers, but success requires complete dedication. Are you prepared for that level of commitment?" "I've been preparing for this opportunity for 3 years," Maria said with quiet confidence. "I won't waste it." That afternoon, Maria stopped by Mario's to have lunch and share her news with Giuseppe. The restaurant felt different now that she was no longer an employee, but the warmth of the place remained unchanged. Giuseppe insisted on making her favorite pasta dish and sitting with her while she ate. "So you start school tomorrow?" he asked, beaming with pride. "Day after tomorrow." "I'm nervous but excited," Maria admitted. "It still doesn't feel real sometimes, that this is actually happening." "You know what I think?" Giuseppe said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "I think that movie star saw something special in you that night. Something the rest of us could see, but maybe you couldn't see in yourself." Maria had told Giuseppe about Vin's generosity, though she had kept the details private out of respect for his desire to avoid publicity. Giuseppe had been amazed but not surprised, explaining that he had always been a good judge of character, and something about Mark had impressed him immediately. He saw someone worth investing in, Maria said. Now I have to prove he was right. You already proved it, Giuseppe said firmly, just by accepting help when you needed it and using it wisely. That takes courage. As Maria was preparing to leave, her phone buzzed with a text message from Vin. How did orientation go? Are you ready to change the world one patient at a time? She smiled and typed back. Orientation was great. I start classes Wednesday. Thank you again for making this possible. His response came quickly. Thank you for having the courage to accept help and the determination to make it count. Can't wait to hear about your first day of classes. The simple exchange filled Maria with warmth and motivation. Knowing that someone believed in her success made the challenges ahead feel manageable rather than overwhelming. That evening, Maria visited Carlos at Serenity Springs for their first family therapy session. The facility allowed family visits twice a week, and Dr. Chen had encouraged them to use these meetings to begin rebuilding their relationship on a foundation of honesty and healthy communication.
Carlos looked better than he had in months.
His skin had cleared up, his eyes were brighter, and he had gained some healthy weight. More importantly, he seemed genuinely engaged in the process of recovery rather than just going through the motions to avoid jail time. How are you feeling about everything? Maria asked as they walked through the facility's garden together. Scared, Carlos admitted, but hopeful, which is something I haven't felt in a long time. The counselors here are different. They don't just lecture about staying clean, they help you understand why you started using in the first place. What have you learned so far? Carlos was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. I've learned that I started using drugs because I felt like I was drowning in expectations and disappointment. After Dad left, I felt like I had to be perfect to make up for his absence. But I kept falling short. The drugs made me feel like I could handle anything, but really, they just made everything worse. Maria felt tears pricking her eyes, realizing how much pain her brother had been carrying alone. Why didn't you ever tell me you were struggling? 'Cause you were already sacrificing so much for the family, Carlos said. You were working constantly, saving money for school, taking care of Mum when she got sick. I didn't want to be another burden. Carlos, you were never a burden. You were my little brother who needed help. I know that now, he said. The therapy sessions are teaching me that families can support each other without anyone having to carry all the weight alone. We're going to learn how to do that together. Dr. Chen joined them for the formal therapy session, guiding them through exercises designed to improve communication and establish boundaries. Maria learned about the difference between supporting someone's recovery and enabling their addiction. Carlos practiced expressing his needs and emotions without manipulation or guilt. Recovery is a family journey, Dr. Chen explained. Addiction affects everyone in the family system, and healing requires everyone to learn new ways of relating to each other. The session was emotionally intense but hopeful. For the first time in years, Maria and Carlos talked honestly about their fears, their love for each other, and their dreams for the future. Carlos shared his goal of eventually working in addiction counseling himself, using his experience to help others who were struggling. Maria talked about her nursing aspirations and how she wanted to specialize in trauma care. What I find beautiful about both of your goals, Dr. Chen observed, is that they involve taking your painful experiences and using them to help others. That's often the most meaningful path to healing. As Maria drove home that evening, she felt a sense of completeness that she hadn't experienced in years. Her brother was getting the help he needed, she was about to start pursuing her lifelong dream, and she had gained an unexpected friendship with someone who had shown her that generosity and kindness still existed in the world. The next day, she spent time preparing for her first day of classes. She organized her textbooks, set up a study area in her small apartment, and reviewed the syllabi for anatomy, physiology, and medical terminology. The workload would be intense, but Maria felt ready for the challenge. That evening, she received another text from Vin. Big day tomorrow. Remember, you belong in that classroom just as much as anyone else. Trust yourself. Thank you for the encouragement, she replied. I promise to make you proud. You already have, came his immediate response. Now go make yourself proud. As Maria went to bed that night, she thought about the conversation she had had with Carlos about taking painful experiences and using them to help others. She realized that this was exactly what Vin had done by helping them. His own family struggles had motivated him to recognize and respond to their situation. Tomorrow she would begin the journey to becoming a nurse, armed with technical knowledge but also with the deep understanding of what it meant to need help and receive compassion from unexpected sources. She would carry Elena's example with her, but she would also carry the memory of a movie star who had chosen to use his platform for kindness, rather than publicity. The ripples of that one evening at Mario's were expanding outward, touching lives that hadn't even been born yet, creating a legacy of compassion that would extend far beyond anything any of them could imagine. 2 years later, Maria Santos stood in the emergency room of St. Mary's Hospital, adjusting her stethoscope as she prepared for another night shift. The familiar controlled chaos of the ER surrounded her, the steady beep of monitors, the quiet conversations between medical staff, and the underlying current of readiness for whatever crisis might come through the doors next. She had graduated from nursing school with highest honors 18 months earlier, passing her licensing exam on the first attempt just as Dr. Williams had predicted. The transition from student to professional nurse had been challenging but deeply fulfilling, and Maria had found her calling in emergency medicine, where she could provide immediate care to people in their most vulnerable moments. Tonight felt especially meaningful because she was working with Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the same nurse who had inspired her career path all those years ago. Elena had recently returned to St. Sura. Mary's after completing her doctorate in nursing practice, and when she learned about Maria's background and motivation for entering nursing, she had specifically requested to have Maria assigned to her team.
You remind me of myself when I started, Elena had told her during their first shift together.
Nursing chose us as much as we chose it. The bond between them had been immediate and profound. Elena became not just a colleague but a mentor, teaching Maria the subtle art of reading patients' unspoken needs and advocating for those who couldn't advocate for themselves. Under Elena's guidance, Maria was developing a reputation as a nurse who could connect with difficult patients and provide comfort in crisis situations. As Maria checked on her assigned patients, she thought about how much her life had changed since that night at Mario's. Carlos had successfully completed his program at Serenity Springs and had been sober for nearly 2 years. He was now working as a peer counselor at a recovery center in East Los Angeles, helping other young people navigate early sobriety. The transformation in him was remarkable. He had regained his quick wit and gentle humor, but now those qualities were tempered by wisdom and genuine empathy. Their family relationships had healed in ways Maria never thought possible. The weekly therapy sessions during Carlos's treatment had taught them all how to communicate honestly and support each other without enabling destructive patterns. Their mother, who had been skeptical of the expensive treatment program at first, now credited it with giving her back her son and her daughter. "You both grew up," she had said recently. Carlos grew into a man who takes responsibility for his choices, and Maria grew into a woman who knows how to accept help gracefully. Maria's friendship with Vin had continued to evolve in unexpected directions. What had started as grateful updates about her progress had become a genuine connection based on shared values and mutual respect. They exchanged messages regularly, sharing stories about their work and occasionally meeting for dinner when his filming schedule brought him to Los Angeles. Vin had visited the hospital several times, always quietly and without fanfare, to see Maria in her professional environment. He brought flowers for the nurses' station and chatted with patients who recognized him, but his primary purpose was always to witness Maria's growth and celebrate her achievements. Watching her care for patients with skill and compassion filled him with the same satisfaction he felt when watching his movies succeed at the box office. "You know what amazes me about you?" he had said during one of their recent conversations. "You never lost sight of why you wanted to become a nurse, even when the studying got difficult or the work became challenging. That sense of purpose has made you extraordinary at what you do." Tonight, as Maria moved through her rounds, she was reminded of why she had been drawn to emergency nursing. In bed 3, an elderly man was recovering from a mild heart attack, worried about the financial burden his hospitalization would place on his family. Maria spent extra time with him, explaining his treatment plan and connecting him with social services that could help with medical bills. In bed 7, a young mother sat with her toddler, who had a severe asthma attack. The mother spoke primarily Spanish and was clearly overwhelmed by the medical environment. Maria was able to communicate with her in her native language, explaining the treatment process and offering reassurance that her child would be fine.
Gracias, enfermera, the woman said with tears in her eyes.
"You made this less frightening." "That's what we're here for," Maria replied gently, remembering how Elena had offered similar comfort to her own mother years earlier.
Around midnight, the ambulance doors opened and paramedics rushed in with a teenager who had overdosed on fentanyl.
The boy was unconscious, his breathing shallow, and the paramedics had already administered 2 doses of Narcan en route. As the trauma team worked to stabilize him, Maria noticed a woman in the waiting room who was crying hysterically. "That's his mother," one of the paramedics explained. "Kid is 17, honor roll student. She found him in his bedroom and has no idea how this happened." Maria's heart clenched with recognition and empathy. This could have been her mother 2 years ago, sitting in a hospital waiting room wondering if her child would survive his addiction. After ensuring the trauma team had everything they needed for the patient, Maria approached the distraught mother. "Patterson?" she said gently. "I'm Maria, one of the nurses taking care of your son. Can I sit with you for a few minutes?" The woman looked up with eyes that held the same desperate fear Maria remembered seeing in her own mother's face during Carlos's worst periods. "Is he going to be okay?" "They won't tell me anything. The doctors are working on stabilizing him right now," Maria said, settling into the chair beside her. "I know this is terrifying, but I want you to know that overdoses like this are treatable, and many young people go on to recover completely." "I don't understand how this happened," Mrs. Patterson sobbed. "David is a good kid. He gets good grades, he plays soccer, he has plans for college. How did he end up here?" Maria spent the next hour with Mrs. Patterson, explaining how addiction could affect anyone regardless of their background or achievements. She shared resources for family support and information about treatment programs that specialized in working with teenagers. Most importantly, she provided the same kind of dignified, compassionate presence that Elena had offered her family years earlier. When David was finally stable and transferred to the ICU, Maria walked Mrs. Patterson to the elevator and gave her a card with contact information for Serenity Springs and several other treatment facilities. "Recovery is possible," Maria told her. "I've seen it happen, and I believe it can happen for David too. But he'll need professional help, and you'll need support as a family." "Thank you," Mrs. Patterson said, gripping Maria's hand tightly. "I don't know what I would have done without your kindness tonight." As Maria returned to her duties, she felt the familiar satisfaction that came from using her professional skills to provide not just medical care but emotional support and practical guidance. This was exactly why she had become a nurse, and moments like these reminded her that every sacrifice had been worthwhile. At the end of her shift, Maria found Elena in the break room, completing her charting for the night. "Rough case with the overdose," Elena observed. "I saw you spending a lot of time with the family." "It reminded me of my own family's experience," Maria said. "Sometimes the families need as much care as the patients."
That's exactly right, Elena said with approval.
"Medical training teaches us how to treat symptoms and diseases, but nursing teaches us how to care for people. You're becoming the kind of nurse who understands that distinction." As Maria drove home in the early morning light, she thought about the text message she would send to Vin later that day. She always shared significant moments from work with him, knowing that he took genuine pride in hearing about the difference she was making in patients' lives. But more than that, she wanted to tell him about Mrs. Patterson and David. About how the ripples from his generosity 2 years earlier were still spreading outward in ways none of them could have predicted. Because she had been able to pursue nursing school, she was now in a position to help other families navigate crisis situations. Because Carlos had received proper treatment, he was helping other young people avoid the mistakes he had made. The investment Vin had made in their family was continuing to pay dividends in the lives of strangers, creating an expanding circle of healing and hope that would touch people they might never meet. When she arrived home, Maria found an envelope that had been slipped under her door. Inside was a note from Giuseppe at Mario's, along with a newspaper clipping. The article was about a new scholarship fund that had been established for restaurant workers who wanted to pursue higher education. The fund was being supported by an anonymous donor who wanted to help people in the service industry achieve their dreams. Giuseppe's note was brief but meaningful. "Thought you should see this. Sounds like someone was inspired by your story." "The ripples keep spreading, my dear." Maria smiled, recognizing Vin's influence in the scholarship program, even though his name wasn't mentioned anywhere in the article. This was exactly the kind of quiet generosity that characterized their friendship, meaningful action without publicity or recognition. Later that afternoon, after she had slept and prepared for another shift, Maria called Vin to share the news about the scholarship fund and thank him for continuing to pay forward the kindness he had shown her family. "It wasn't my idea alone," Vin said. "Giuseppe called me a few months ago and suggested that there might be other people in situations similar to yours. We decided to create a more formal way to help. How many people will the scholarship help? We're starting with funding for 10 recipients this year, but we hope to expand it annually. Giuseppe is helping identify candidates, and we're partnering with several community colleges to provide not just tuition assistance, but mentoring and support services." Maria felt tears welling up, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the generosity and vision behind the program. "Do you realize how many lives this could change? Do you realize that you're the reason it exists?" Vin replied gently. "Your success, your gratitude, your determination to make the most of the opportunity you were given, that inspired the expansion. You proved that investing in people's dreams creates returns that go far beyond any individual success story. That evening, as Maria prepared for another night shift, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment, from crying in a storage closet to becoming a nurse who could provide comfort and guidance to other families in crisis. The transformation felt both miraculous and earned. She thought about Elena, whose simple act of kindness to a scared little girl had set in motion a chain of events that was still unfolding. She thought about Vin, whose willingness to help a stranger had not only changed her life but had inspired him to create systematic ways to help others. She thought about Carlos, whose recovery had enabled him to become a source of hope for other people struggling with addiction. But mostly, she thought about all the patients and families she would care for in the years ahead, and all the people who would benefit from the scholarship fund, and all the ripple effects that would continue spreading outward from acts of kindness both large and small. As she walked into St. Mary's Hospital for another night of healing and service, Maria Santos carried with her the profound understanding that sometimes the most powerful force in the world is one person's willingness to believe in another person's potential. The investment Vin had made in her dreams was paying returns in ways none of them had imagined, creating a legacy of compassion that would continue long after all of them were gone. The story that had begun with tears in a storage closet had become a testament to the transformative power of unexpected kindness, proving that sometimes the most ordinary moments can become the foundation for extraordinary change. And in emergency rooms and treatment centers, in scholarship applications and family therapy sessions, the ripples continued to spread, touching lives and creating hope in ways that would never make headlines, but would matter forever.